Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the 7shifts Restaurant Growth Podcast. I'm your host, DJ, and today on the show I had the pleasure of speaking with Kelly McCutcheon. Kelly is the VP of People for Hopdoddy Burger Bar, which has 32 locations across the southwestern US. We were first introduced when I was doing some research for a blog post on 7shifts about succeeding as a restaurant employee. And what that takes, and we got into a little bit of a conversation about establishing core values at your restaurant. And I just thought to myself that would make such a great episode of the show. So I asked Kelly if she would come on, and today here we are. We had a great conversation, goes into how they establish their core values at Hopdoddy, and how it kind of influences the decisions they make and everything from hiring across the board to promotions, and even how it influenced their decisions early on in the pandemic when they had to close some stores. I hope you guys come away with it with some awesome ideas. I know I did, and establishing core values at your restaurant. And without further ado, here is that conversation. Hey, Kelly, how's it going?
It's going great. How's it going, DJ?
It's going really well. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely, me too. Kelly, before we begin, if you would just kind of give our audience a little background on what you do in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm VP of People for Hopdoddy Burger Bar. We're an Austin-based, well, our name means burger and beer, but we kind of joke that we're a truffle fry and margarita place.
Nice.
We have 32 locations in 5 states. And prior
Amazing.
to my almost 8 years here, I worked for a decade at PF Chang's. And
Very cool.
that's kind of takes you through my resume a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. And the main reason I wanted to have you on the show today, we're introduced actually by Frank Palmieri over at Fuku, who's in a similar role to yours. And we were just chatting a little bit about, what it takes to succeed as an employee in the restaurant business, which I included in a recent blog post on the site. But, you also gave me some great stuff about establishing core values and how you did that at Hopdoddy. So I really wanted to just kind of get, your perspective on that. How did that come about? And how did you go about with your team sitting down and establishing what your core values are as a company? Because with so many locations, I feel like you have to have something driving that, and it's important to put that down on paper and put it out in the world.
Yeah. So our core values, and I think core values in general, are really that guiding light. You need that vision for everybody to kind of lead the way. And I'll tell you 2 things about our core values before I dive into how we got them. One, it was facilitator led, and 2, if you're interested in this, I strongly recommend you pick up the book Traction by Gino Wickman. It really outlines almost to the T what we did, but you don't necessarily need either of those things. You can do this on your own. It's really accessible. So the first thing we did was get our key stakeholders in a room together. And there were about 8 of us at the time. And we were each challenged to list 3 team members. And those team members had to be difference makers. The ones that, if we could only build our team of these 3 people, who would it be?
Yeah.
And we each wrote that down kind of in secret, right? And then we shared that list of 3. And the first thing we realized is how much overlap there was. So at this time, we already had 20 plus locations when we were crafting these core values. So we had a lot of team members to choose from. And we did choose everyone from hourly team members, managers, regionals, and beyond. So we had a lot of commonality. And then we just started a conversation about, okay, now what is it about the 3 that you chose that makes them difference makers? What makes them stand out? And what is it, what is that characteristic that you want to see in others? And so from that, as you can imagine, we came up with, oh gosh, it must have been a list of about 50, 60 different characteristics.
Wow.
And you started to notice the similarities. So one thing our facilitator did that I thought was really cool is they didn't write the each characteristic in a list. As we named things, they started grouping them together, and I saw what they were doing. And you could do that in 1 step or 2, right? You list everything and then you go, okay,
Yep.
well, goodness, caring and like given a bleep. Those are kind of the same things, right? Or
Yeah.
and we started grouping them together, and initially had, I think, around 5 different categories, and then you have to do the really tough thing, and
Yeah.
that's, you have to say what doesn't fit, and you start crossing things out and make those tough decisions. And you kind of come up with things that you're like, okay, this feels right, but maybe it doesn't sound right, and you have to be okay
Yeah.
with that. Um, and so from that, you let it marinate and you let it sit, and then you return to it, and start to wordsmith it. And ultimately, that's how we came up with our 4 core values, which are be open-minded, have the
Mhm.
hunger, raise the burger bar, and do right. Um, and I'll tell you just a couple of things about those. First of all, less is
Yeah.
more, right? If you can
Of
really
course.
narrow down to between 3 and 7 things that make your company unique, the better. And then the second thing is, you'll notice they're action oriented. They don't have to be, but that was really important to us to give
Yeah.
us direction. It's not just about who we are, but what we do. So I'll pause there. That's kind of a front loading a lot of information,
Yeah.
but that's what we did, and it was an amazing and incredible experience.
Absolutely. Were there any that didn't make the cut? Like you had to like argue over them, or like I really want this to be one, but maybe some other stakeholders weren't as keen on it, or you found out that maybe it was something that you wished was true, but didn't
Mhm.
accurately really represent the company.
Sure. Well, I think that the answer to both of your questions is yes, but I'll start with the second one, the things that we wished were true. I mean, the good thing about starting with actual people in your company is you aren't necessarily starting from a place of aspiration, except that you aspire to be more like, the people that you're identifying as your best.
Yeah.
Um, but I think in terms of things that didn't make the cut, yeah, absolutely. I think that we had to, the first question you have to ask yourself, is this really a difference maker, right? Everybody,
Right.
um, for example, we went around a lot. Everybody has a core value around integrity, right? And so we really had to identify that do right wasn't just on the list to check the box, that we could think back to times where we had used that specific definition we were giving, um, around that core value uh, to use as that guiding light, that we've used that to make decisions about who we hire. And I'll give you one quick example. It's kind of after the fact, not necessarily in that room,
Yeah.
but when we were in the midst of the pandemic had just hit. Sorry, this podcast isn't going to come up without the pandemic's not
No,
going to
we were
come up.
talking about that for a
Um,
long time.
but when we were sitting in a room trying to figure out what to do with all of our restaurants that had closed, fortunately, temporarily, um, with our team members, we really talked about do right, and the decision to furlough people and allow them to keep their benefits, and help with those premiums and things like that, because we felt like, even though that was um, a weight for us to continue to carry, it was really important that we had that tether to invite the team members back as soon as
Yeah.
possible. So do right was at the forefront of a lot of those really tough COVID decisions that we had to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to kind of walk the walk, if you will. You say we're hired for these kind of people, but we also have to act that way when push comes to shove. We have to live those values as well in choosing and making those hard decisions. I love that.
It comes up every day. We talk
Yeah.
about, there's not a day that goes by that I don't say one of our core values at least.
Yeah,
Um,
that's kind of what my next question was. How do they influence kind of the day to day, and how are they represented, I suppose? Maybe we'll start with like the hiring process. Are they in your job description?
Yeah. So they are not necessarily spelled out in the job description, and but there are hints at them, and I'll tell you why.
Mhm.
Because people read your job description, and we don't
Yeah.
necessarily, we want to look for that authenticity, right? So you don't necessarily want somebody to go into the interview. You know when somebody's read your website, and
Yeah.
they're gonna, I would do it. I think it's smart, but at the same time,
Right.
those are kind of like uh the things that we protect, that we look for, that are on the inside. And so what
Right.
we do is, uh, our interview guide is comprised of a couple of initial questions, but there are 8 questions. There's 2 questions about be open-minded. There's 2 questions about have the hunger. There's 2 questions about do right. And there's 2 questions about raise the burger bar.
Yep.
And everybody goes through 2 interviews. And the first interview asks the first question and the second interview asks the second question. So we're really scanning for,
Yeah.
does this person have that kind of, that fit and that ad that we're looking for?
Yeah. And naturally, without like having, like you mentioned, read the job description, it's like, okay, I'm gonna like, come up with my best spiel here to fit this because I really want this. I guess looking for it inherently and making sure they're not, cheating on the test, if you will.
It's been incredible since implementing that. How I was just having a conversation yesterday about it, about an interview, and really they give you the answer. That's what's great when you're faced with tough decisions like who do we add to our team, and you have
Right.
something like core values, you know the answer already. You ask yourself, does this person have the hunger? Um, and what's awesome about that, I like to say that, um, I think hiring for cultural fit is getting a bit of a bad rap right now, and for good reason, right? We're
Yeah.
a lot of companies, Hopdoddy included, really focused on diversity and inclusion. And to me, core values are the inclusion of diversity and inclusion. They're those things that everybody should have in common when
Yeah.
everything else can be different. And everything else really should. You want that diversity of thought, but
Of
everybody
course.
should have hunger, right? At
Yeah.
Hopdoddy, everyone should be open-minded. We're a company that changes uh, a lot of things a lot of the time because we're always looking for what's better, and that kind of links to raising the burger bar, being our own best example. And so anyway, that those are the things I think that are the table stakes. And just to briefly go back to your other question,
Yeah.
that was a part of the core value conversations and the tough calls. A lot of the things we listed, we said, well, why do we love this person? Well, they show up on time. Well, that's a table stake, right? But on time is
Right.
not going to be a core
The core
value. And so
value. Yeah.
you have to kind of wade through some of those table stakes as well.
Absolutely. You don't want it to be just kind of like, yeah, table stakes, like you said. Um, if I guess if
Can't
you're a
have
rest, yeah, every restaurant, do you think every restaurant should have different core values?
Absolutely. Every concept really. I mean, there's going to be some overlap, right? But find your own
Right.
words.
Yeah.
I love Zappo's core value of do more with less. I use that a lot in my personal life, but we're not going to adopt that and slap that onto Hopdoddy and say, oh, we do that too,
Right.
right? We have to find
Right.
our own way.
Yeah. I mean, that's a shoe company. So it's like they're a shoe retailer.
Mm.
So I don't think that, of course you can be inspired, but I think just straight lifting them you're probably going to wind up finding that it doesn't in the end fit what you wanted anyway.
That's right. It's not
Yeah,
genuinely, authentically ours.
absolutely. Let me see what's here. I guess my other question is this is a pretty recent, relatively recent thing that you guys did. Do you foresee them ever changing as the business changes? Do you feel that they're going to be a static driver for you for a long time? Or is this something that you're open to shifting and being like, well, we don't value this as much anymore, so we're not going to add it to our core values, but we do right now, maybe we're in a growth stage and we value X. Do you foresee those changing ever?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because we're almost an 11-year brand. We were about 5 or 6, I think, when we came up with our core values. So it's
Wow.
been a couple of years. But I think there is a difference between culture and climate, and your culture is your why. It really, I'm not saying that it would never shift or change, right? We evolve culturally all the time.
Yeah.
So you have to be open to that, but I think that they would be the last things to go. There's
Yeah.
uh, climate can change, and because they're your why, your what can change, right?
Yeah.
Simon Sinek has the TED Talk on that very subject, but
Of course.
um, I think that your core values should be that true north for you. And if you're constantly, you know, hiring, making decisions based on your core values, using them to guide you, you're kind of always moving closer towards them, not necessarily evolving further away. So I think on the majority, my answer would be no, but you do have to be open to there's obviously times where, yes, you may need to go through that process again and see if it still holds true, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think kind of my last real question here, um, or actually, I do have I actually have two, but the first one is, other than, the tough decisions to make those furloughs and, when the pandemic first hit, can you think of maybe another recent business decision, not necessarily hiring, that you went to those core values to help make that decision?
Well, as someone who oversees people, I use them a lot for
Of course.
um, for hiring, but I would also say, um, you know, uh, I'll give you two examples of how we put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. So the
Sure.
first one is, it's not recent, but this is how we rolled them out, right? It's really important that once you have those core values, that you allow them to marinate for a little bit, like incubate, let them sit. I would almost not touch them for a couple of weeks and then return to them and see how they feel, because they're gonna, to our previous question, they're gonna last a very long time. So it's really
Yep.
important that you give them a couple of weeks to age and see how
Absolutely.
you feel.
Yeah.
So once that happens, though, then you have to go through the process of rolling it out to your team. And we have quarterly all hands calls with our entire team, virtually, of course. And that's where we introduced these core values. And we incorporated them in our training materials, and we started training them and did train the trainers and things like that. But we went around and did town halls in our restaurants, and each time our CEO, Jeff, took a $20 bill out of his pocket and he said, okay, who can name the four core values? He like literally
Yeah.
put his money where his mouth is. So, but uh, fast forwarding right now, I know that this is kind of a hiring decision, but I think when they're integrated into every decision, it's kind of hard to come up with just a single
Of
example.
course. Yep.
But right now we have 47 of our managers were once team members for us. So that's about 50%
Wow.
of our team. We have 3 GMs who've gone through our TM to GM program, and I can really attribute that to our core value of have the hunger, right? We
Right.
look for people who want to grow, and when you're a growing company, um, it's helpful to draw people in who want to grow alongside you and help you establish that pipeline and be more and do more. And so um, that has really helped us identify very early on. We in the application, we say, are you interested in leadership? And in
Wow.
our certification, so someone goes through 3 days of training as a new team member. In that certification, we say, what's next for you? They're 3 days into working at Hopdoddy, and we say, what's next for you? And a lot of people say, I want to be a trainer. I love my
Yeah.
training experience. I want to be a lead. I want to be a general manager. And so we're already putting them on the path because we've identified that hunger in themselves to learn more. So hopefully that's a good example for you. It's still kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
hiring internally, but it helps. It really
Once
helps.
the hire is made. Yeah, absolutely. And just putting them on that path right from the beginning, not wait, not waiting and maybe they're thinking to themselves, man, I really want to be a trainer, but they're not saying it, or it's not being recognized. And then, some time goes by and I'm not getting what I want out of this, and then they may wind up leaving. So it's
Yeah, that
amazing that
question
you.
unasked, so to speak, right? We don't want to have that question unasked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess my last question is really, if I'm a restaurant owner, or, maybe I have just one restaurant, or maybe I have a bunch of different concepts or multiple locations of a concept. But I want to go down and I want to start doing this and come up with my core values. What's something you wish you knew going into the process that you know now
Mm.
that like maybe would have helped make it easier or made it, faster even? Um,
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind is the parable or the saying, the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, but
yeah,
the second best time is now. I truly wish, I think we would have come up with the same core values had we done the exercise. When I started with the company, we had 3 restaurants, and
yeah,
um, I I think we could have come up with the same um, core values then that we did several years later. So a lot of times people want to prioritize, you know, um, tackling issues or coming up with the metrics and so on. And I think that starting with those core values, which many of you may be thinking, well, the best time was 20 years ago. Okay, but the second best time is now, So my
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
kind of wish and advice is you can do it now. And I would just throw one other book out there, especially for those restaurateurs um, that are starting with that one restaurant or have that one restaurant. There's a great book, new book by Brant Menswar called Black Sheep, and it's about cultivating your own personal values. And I think about, if you're a restaurateur with one restaurant, there's really going to be a similarity between your core values and the restaurants, right? It takes on the
Yeah, of
personality of the person who's in there every day. And so,
course.
I strongly recommend picking up that book. It's amazing.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. But Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this is going to be great just a great resource for restaurant owners and managers to come up with core values for their own teams.
Awesome. Well, it was my pleasure. I really appreciate you setting this up, and y'all are
Of
welcome
course.
to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to pick up the conversation.
Absolutely. And before we go, where can people find you and Hopdoddy as well?
Yeah, just check out hopdoddy.com
Cool.
for our locations. We're mostly in Texas, but we're in California, Arizona, Colorado, and Tennessee. So check us
Wonderful.
out. Burger you've ever had. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Kelly McCutcheon.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 7shifts Restaurant Management and Growth Podcast. For more great content, you can check out our blog at 7shifts.com/blog. You can also find us on every social media platform: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at 7shifts. Thanks again.